Hello, this is Greg Ligon with Leadership Network, and I'm here today with Jon Ferguson from Community Christian Church for this conversation about multiplication. Jon is the co-founder of Community Christian Church in Chicago. They're celebrating 25 years this year. Actually, I think just in this week maybe, or within the next couple weeks anyway. So exciting stuff for them. They have 14 campuses, and Jon, tell us a little bit about your work there at Community Christian, and in particular, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the things that you're doing in the city of Chicago. But welcome, Jon. We're glad you're here today.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's exciting to be a part of it. Glad I had the opportunity to get online here with you and spend some time talking about multiplication and what we're up to here at Community, as well as throughout Chicagoland, and actually even increasingly more throughout the country and internationally. But yeah, we just celebrated 25 years, and I can't even believe it. I always tell people, well, we started when I was 13. But yeah, we've had a really good time. We had a little celebration with our staff this past week, and they made Dave and I come up front and do a chubby bunny contest with marshmallows.
That's classic. That is classic.
I won't tell you who won, but I've always been known to have a bigger mouth than Dave. And we settled that for sure. It was a good time. Very
good. Yeah, well, thanks. I want you to kind of tell just a little bit about, for those that may not know the story of Community Christian, just kind of give us a little bit of an intro to that, and then let's move to the work that you're doing specifically in Chicago and the kind of the new network that you're developing there.
Yeah, sure thing, Greg. Yeah, Dave and I and just a handful of friends started Community, like I said, 25 years ago. And, Dave was like 25, I was 23. One of the youngest guy on the team was 21 at the time. I often say that, I can believe people came the first time. I just can't believe they came back. But that was just, I think, another indication that God was kind of in this. And I know he rescued us many times from ourselves. But yeah, we started with really a threefold vision from the beginning, Greg. And, we wanted to be, first of all, an impact church. And for us, that meant we wanted to be a church that was reaching people who were far from God. We wanted to be the kind of church that, if somehow, we just disappeared, that people would recognize that. They'd feel like something was missing, not just the people that attend, but the community would actually go, wow, this was a better community with that church here. That church was making an impact. So that was the first phase of the vision. Second phase was that we wanted to be a reproducing church. And, we love church planting. Dave and I, my dad is a church planter, started a church in Chicago when I was 2 years old. And so that was kind of in our blood. None of the guys on our team, his dad was the director of a church planting organization in Chicagoland. So, I mean, that was a part of who we were. We knew we weren't going to just be one church. We wanted to reproduce. Figured that would be through church planting. But, over the course of the years, this whole idea of multi-site kind of came along. And really, we got swept in that in the early stages when it was just a handful of churches across the country that were doing that, and started reproducing locally as well as nationally. And so then the third phase of that vision was that, if God would so bless what we're up to, we'd love to, be a catalyst for a movement. And honestly, we would kind of say that part of our vision under our breath a little bit, because it seemed kind of presumptuous when there's only 5 of you sitting around a table at a hen-house restaurant in rural Illinois. I'm sure many people would say, why don't you just try starting a small group before you talk about catalyzing a movement? But, I think in our most courageous moments, we would say, yeah, you know what, if God would give us the opportunity and bless what we're doing, we'd love to see, him catalyze a movement. If we could be a part of that, that would be great. And so, yeah, that was the vision from the beginning. Our mission was always simply helping people find their way back to God. And that's kind of what made our heart beat fast. And, now, like you said, we're 14 locations here locally throughout the Chicagoland area, and about 150 churches and sites are a part of New Thing. And New Thing's our church planting mission which includes a number of movements and networks, and they're all about reproducing and also helping people find their way back to God.
Right. Well, I know just probably, I'm not sure exactly the timeline, but it's been within the last 3 or 4 years. You guys made a decision to do something a little bit different and to move into Chicago, the heart of the city, and establish a new network there. Talk a little bit about that, kind of what drove that decision, and then what are some of the things you're experiencing at this stage of the game?
Yeah, sure thing, Greg. Like I said, community started in Naperville, and Naperville's a great place to live, great suburb. When we decided to go there, it was one of the fastest growing suburbs in the country. We knew a lot of new people would be moving in there, people of influence, that if we could, reach them, and we really felt like it could be sort of a kind of a springboard to reach more and more people throughout Chicagoland and maybe even throughout the country. And so all of our sites really were in the suburbs for probably the first, when we started our first multi-site was our Romeoville campus in 1998. And, we continued to reproduce locations up until about, 5, 6 years ago. We had about 8 or 9 locations, but all of them were in the suburbs. And I think when you think about that third part of our vision to really catalyze a movement, we really believed that it would be important that we're not only in the suburbs, but we're also, reproducing locations and reaching people within the city limits of Chicago. There's over 3 million people in Chicago, 9 million in Chicagoland. And you think about, like Northwest Indiana all the way up to just about southern Wisconsin. And that's one of the things that makes Chicago interesting. It really different maybe than other metropolitan areas. There is what's sort of a geography that's called Chicagoland. And that is it's a huge 9 million people. You don't hear about New York land or Los Angeles land necessarily, taking those shots at those great cities. But Chicagoland is unique in that it's a massive geography with lots of people. And quite honestly, the chances of someone finding their way back to God in the city of Chicago, based on their proximity to a life-giving church, is much, much less than it is in the suburbs. And so, we'd had the chance to plant churches in some great places all over the country, in Boston, in Miami, and in New York. I got to walk alongside a church planter in Manhattan for several months and help get a great church, reproducing multi-site church there started. That's doing great. That's part of a new thing. And every time I would have the opportunity to be in these cities, I always kind of felt like, man, we got to do something in a city that's right down the street from us in Chicago. What's it going to take for us to do that? And then, as a family, we talk about, my wife, Lisa, and I, and, we lived in Wheaton for 9 years, great suburb. Wheaton College is there. We lived in Naperville for 11 years. My daughter was 10. My son was 13 at the time. But just kind of always felt like, we fit in the city. We enjoyed the city. We loved it. But you kind of have that, I think, sense of like, okay, were we infatuated with this idea, or would we really thrive there? And then you combine that with being compelled by the mission. We just got to a point where we felt like we could not do it. And I know that might sound a little bit like you're backing into something, but I don't know. That's how God works with me sometimes. I get to a point where, okay, I just can't not do this. And so that was when we decided as a church and as a leadership that, we want to launch some new locations in the city. And so kind of came up with this vision of launching three new locations over the course of 3 years. And so we moved here over 3.5 years ago now. It's time just flies by. God works some miracles to land us here. And we started launching sites in Chicago.
So I think you just said you have 3 campuses now in Chicago. Kind of tell us a little bit about is there a different demographic kind of that you're trying to reach with each of those campuses? Tell us a little bit about those campuses.
Yeah, Chicago's made up of 200 neighborhoods, 77 communities. Each community kind of has different neighborhoods. And quite honestly, the ethnic and socioeconomic makeup of each one of those neighborhoods can be dramatically different, even within the context of a larger community. And so the first site that we launched was in Lincoln Square, which is kind of on the northwest side of the city. It's about 4 or 5 miles from where I'm at right now. This is where I live. I live in Lincoln Park. Lincoln Square is another community. And some people refer to Lincoln Square as sort of the Mayberry of Chicago. And it's just a community that attracts a lot of young families, also a lot of singles as well. kind of has its own little sort of quaint downtown area that attracts people for shopping and just spending time and hanging out. But in some ways, Lincoln Square was probably a good place for us to go first, because it, in some respects, was somewhat like where we've been in the past in the suburbs. It was kind of like a little suburb in the city, and so it made sense for us to start there in some regards. And so we launched that campus, let's see, I guess that would be 3 years ago. Yeah, just over 3 years ago. And so that was our first launch. And so that's Lincoln Square. Then our second launch was in Edgewater. And Edgewater is right on the edge of the water, right on the edge of Lake Michigan, further up north, but still a part of the city of Chicago. Now, Edgewater is one of the most diverse communities in the city. And a lot of refugees that are coming into Edgewater, just an incredible mix. And we have a campus pastor team that's heading up that location, Rich and Dory Gorman. And they're just exceptional at reaching that multi-ethnic, diverse community up there in Edgewater. And they meet in a school, have a tremendous relationship with the school. They've partnered with and really began to operate a non-for-profit for that school called Friends of Swift to raise money, because the Chicago school system is in such need. Anyway, we can come alongside them and help bring God's dream to that community by improving the educational opportunities for those kids, the huge win. So Edgewater's again, completely different from Lincoln Square. And then the last one, which we just launched last October, is in Lincoln Park. And that happens to be where I live. And Lincoln Park is, if you know Chicago, you probably know the Loop first. And then the second most probably known community would be Lincoln Park, or maybe Hyde Park. Hyde Park is where President Obama is from, and University of Chicago. Lincoln Park is, it tends to be the place where maybe when people graduate from a university somewhere in the country, they think, hey, I want to be in a major city. I'm going to go to Chicago. Okay, I'll live in Lincoln Park. And it's a great community. Seems like a lot of young people, recent college graduates, a lot of them live in the Loop. Maybe they're working for a major accounting firm, something like that. And then there's people that maybe if they've done quite well, they're able to stick around. They stay in Lincoln Park and they raise their families here. And so it's an interesting place too. So each community is really different. They're all three brand new. And so it's really been fun, challenging for sure, but also really fun to launch three kind of in rapid fire, learn from each other, work together as a team, and just kind of see what God is going to do.
Yeah, as you think about what you're doing there in Chicago and what you've done in the suburbs, and the other kind of contexts where you've planted campuses, what are the things that are there unique? What are the unique challenges? And then also maybe a little bit about what some of the unique opportunities are in that context.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from a challenge standpoint, I think I have a problem sometimes when we talk about urban versus suburban, because I mean, anymore the suburbs and the city oftentimes can feel very, very similar. For example, we launched a campus in East Aurora, which is right next to Naperville, and it has significant challenges with poverty. The school systems in East Aurora are very need a lot of help, and so you compare that to something like Lincoln Park, where it's for the most part rather affluent. Schools are still a challenge, but there's a lot of private schools in Lincoln Park which people can afford to send their kids to. So you really have to be careful when you talk about city versus suburbs. It's really each individual location, I think, is different. You have to contextualize what you're doing, no matter where you go, from suburb to suburb or from the suburbs to the city. And so even trying to talk in a general term about Chicago versus the suburbs, I think is really difficult. I could talk to you about, the difference between Lincoln Park and Naperville or Edgewater and Naperville, but they really are so distinct. I think, a couple broad sweeping observations. The transit nature. I mean, people move in and they move out. And I think you really do have to have the sense that, okay, God has put us here. We're in a world-class city. People move here. There's a lot of movers and shakers, people that are going to maybe move to all parts of the country, all parts of the world. We have them for a season. Can we invest in them, get them on mission, and then really see yourselves constantly as a sending church, a sending organization that's all about that? And, you kind of have to hold on to people loosely. I just in the last week, got the news from a couple of our campus pastors down here. Some key families are moving, one to Atlanta, another to the suburbs because their kids are getting ready to go into high school and they can't find a good school for them. And, it breaks your heart, but that's just part of the nature of being down here. Those challenges are real. I think, acknowledging the diversity, the expense, the cost is significantly higher for the most part in the city, particularly when it comes to renting places to meet, as well as housing and other issues like that. But the opportunities are unbelievable. You're talking about a city of 9 million people in Chicagoland. So many great universities, educational centers, the Center of Finance, art. I could just go on and on. So that's what gets me excited, is the opportunity to have an impact on some of those areas, and hopefully kind of spread that even beyond the city of Chicago. There's plenty to do here. I could see myself being here for another 25 years. So there's a lot of cool things about what God wants to do, I think, through community and some other great churches that are doing some amazing things here in Chicago.
As you think about the next several years, what's next? Outside of is there a particular series of campuses you're looking at, or as you think about maybe even bigger than just adding campuses, is there kind of a bigger part of that vision that's kind of driving you and keeps you awake at night in a good way?
Yeah, Greg, a couple things. Community's vision is really 200 locations throughout the Chicagoland area, and we got a long ways to go. We got 14, okay? But you might as well dream big. But we're also, reproducing networks and coming into the city of Chicago, starting a network of new church sites, I think is another way to expand the vision and capture really the imagination of other leaders who'd like to be a part of something like that. And so we feel like that's kind of a unique opportunity. Also, even reproducing movements. So we see a movement right now, and we're kind of making this up as we go, but we feel like a movement could be as many as 20 different locations that would include probably 4 or 5 networks within that movement. A lot of that's about span of care. How many people can a network leader or a movement leader direct or lead or provide care for? But, you can imagine, a young leader or someone who has a vision for church planting, and not just planting a church, but reproducing locations. And, we'd love to come alongside them and say, hey, you know what, don't just think about planting one site or even 2 or 3. How about a network, or maybe even a network of networks, which we would call a movement. And so we know that it's going to take a lot of networks, and it's going to take many movements for us to reach that vision of 200 locations throughout the city of Chicago. The other piece of that too, though, and this has been something that has been really impressed me since we moved to the city, is just what God is already doing here through so many great churches. And you're familiar with many of them, I know, Greg. New Life here in Chicago, Mark Job, Kevin Bursama, they have like 18 or 20 locations throughout the city of Chicago already. Choco de Jesus at New Life Covenant, just another great church that's reproducing. Park Community Church right here on the north side. Missio Dei. There's a lot of great churches that are already doing some amazing work here in the city. And that's super encouraging. I don't think we saw that maybe even 7 or 8 years ago. And then also just the camaraderie that's there, the encouragement, the support. And so we're looking at some new ways to kind of come together. Not that, every one of these churches have huge visions, but we do get a sense that together, maybe what we can do is accelerate the movement that's already occurring. None of these churches need necessarily another church to tell them how to do it, but we do have a sense that together, maybe we can accelerate, do it better and even faster. And so there's some beginnings of conversations and dialogues and meetings that are happening to kind of look at what that might be like for Chicago. And certainly we're seeing that in other parts of the country as well. But we, love to think.
Yeah, you have another city on. You have another major city on your radar?
From a new thing standpoint or community standpoint? Yeah, absolutely. We have a great church planter in New York right now who's reproducing locations. He's got a great church on the east side, as well as a campus in Brooklyn. Brian Mall is his name. Another guy in Boston, Hank Wilson, who's doing great work. They have a couple locations. Of course, Troy McMahon in Kansas City. The city's that's my bias. It's the hub, man. It's where the action is. So, and that's really where the influence starts. And so, and I think that's, that's reflected in and some of Paul's journeys if you read the New Testament. But I think it's also plays out just in culture and in what we see happening across the country. So yeah, if there's any leaders out there that are excited about doing reproducing networks or movements in these cities, be sure and shoot me a note, give me a call. We'd love to talk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you jumped right to your shameless plug that we promised that you'd be able to do. Anything else you want to tell our viewing audience about that you guys are a part of that they need to be a part of as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Greg, I mentioned it earlier. We were so fortunate to be in the groundwork, I believe the first leadership community for multi-site that Leadership Network ever put together. And I believe that first day that we convened was September 1st, 2001. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Or 9/11.
September 11th. It was 9/11.
And yeah, I mean, such a collision of emotions and feelings that were going on that day. And in retrospect, interesting to think that God was up to something that day that I feel like has had an impact on the church nationally, perhaps even internationally. When you think about the churches that were gathered in that room and convened by Leadership Network, and the journey that we were able to go with those churches, Seacoast and Charleston. You think about Life Church and Community and North Coast, and I mean, it was a great group of churches. I know when we looked around them going kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? But fortunately, you guys, let us play and learn from each other. Those are relationships that we still have today. And so, shameless plug, that's easy, man. I mean, if I was to encourage any churches that are wanting to not only be a multi-site church, but what I would call a reproducing church, get connected with a leadership community at Leadership Network. You guys are doing great work. You, Greg, and Jeff, and Warren, of course, have written a couple of great books that have been super helpful, Multi-Site Revolution and Multi-Site Road Trip. And, there's great resources out there. So you're very, very kind, but I was giving you the opportunity to do a shameless plug for yourself. Yeah, well, I mean, that couple thoughts on that. Exponential Conference is a tremendous gathering of church planters, people that are interested in what it looks like to reproduce leaders, campuses, churches, networks, movements. And I think you'll find at the Exponential Conference that some of these people that you've read about, you've heard about, suddenly they become your peers at that conference, and you can interact with them. And I think that makes that conference unique. So Exponential now in Orlando in April, and then in Southern California in October. If you don't have plans to go to that, great conference. Greg helped Dave and I write a book called Exponential, and really kind of tells the story of community. But I think there's also some really practical tools in there that I think other people have found helpful in their reproducing journey. Actually, Dave and I also have another book coming out. I'll put a plug in for that one. Looks like probably in the fall. We just sent the manuscript in last week, so I'm feeling a little sense of relief. The weight is lifted. And the title of that book is going to be Finding Your Way Back to God. And excited about, in some ways, that book sort of be an extension of what Community's mission has been from day one. And, we know that, Gallup says over 90% of people say they believe in God. So belief in God is not really the challenge, but how many people really believe that God is real. And so our hope is that book will help people experience God in a way maybe they haven't before, and just kind of taking sort of a prayer wager or a dare to say, okay, God, if you're real, make yourself real to me, and praying that prayer and seeing if God doesn't show up in a way that he never has before.
Well, that's exciting, and really thrilled for you on that new book coming out, and just for all the great work that you guys are doing. It's been fun for me to get to know you the last almost 15 years now, I guess. And as I've told you and Dave both, you guys, nobody else does team better than you guys do, and really appreciate all the impact that you're having in the kingdom, and certainly consider it a privilege to partner with you along the way. So thanks again for being with us today, and we'll look forward to being not just on video, but face-to-face here sometime soon.
Absolutely. Hey, if I could say one more thing too. If anybody's interested in reproducing churches and a residency, would love to talk more about church planting, go to newthing.org and let us get a conversation so we can begin to talk about what God might have, what dreams that we might be able to come alongside and help kind of fan that flame so that you too can be a part of this reproducing movement. Thanks a lot, Greg. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, John, and thanks for joining us for this edition of Conversations with Leadership Network. Take care.